Hi, Ninja Nerds. In this video, we're going to talk about the arteries and veins of the wireman. We're only going to specifically focus, though, on the upper limb and the lower limb vessels, arteries and veins. Just a little bit of orientation here for you. This is going to be the right side, so this is going to be the right upper limb, and this is going to be the right lower limb. This over here would be the left upper limb, and this right here would be the left lower limb. And we're looking at this from an anterior, and we might have a couple lateral views, okay? Another thing is, in this video, we are not going to focus on any of the vessels of the head and the neck and the actual the torso. We're specifically only going to focus on the upper and lower limbs. So let's go ahead and get started with the upper limb arteries. So if you look here, the first one we're going to have to go to is the subclavian artery, which is about right there, okay? So you're going to have the subclavian. Now, technically, this is the left side, so this would be the left subclavian artery. In the same way, you'd have a right subclavian artery also. But I'm not going to call every single one of these left, just know that this is the left side. So first one is the subclavian artery. Then right here, you see where you see this vein here? This vein kind of cuts off right there. There's an artery just behind it, which is called the axillary artery, okay? So there's an artery right here about, which is called the axillary artery. So you have subclavian, then you have axillary. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna hit some of the minor branches coming off of these arteries here. So if you look here, we have this artery right here coming off of the axillary artery. And this one right here, it's actually a specific branch called the thoracoacromial artery. Okay, so this one right here is called the thoracoacromial artery. There's another branch which is right here, and this is going to be called the lateral thoracic artery. In the same way, there's another one right over here, which is called the superior thoracic artery. Now in the back here, we also have another branch of the axillary, and that's going to be this one back here. So this one right here is called the subscapular artery. There's another one, though, that actually connects with the subscapular artery. It's this one right here. And that is going to be called the circumflex scapular artery, okay? So we have the circumflex scapular artery, we have the subscapular artery, we have the thoracoacromial, the lateral thoracic, and the superior thoracic artery. Okay, now let's go ahead and keep going down. So now we're going to continue down the axillary, and we're going to go into this part here, which is going to be the brachial artery. So now we're at the brachial artery. The brachial artery has a bunch of branches coming off too. So if you see this one right here coming anterior, and there's another branch posterior. This is called the anterior circumflex humeral artery. There's another one coming out the back, and that's called the posterior circumflex humeral artery. Okay, we come down the brachial, we have another branch coming out this side, and it's going to go pretty deep. So they call this the deep brachial artery. Okay, so it's called the deep brachial artery. Another branch here is this guy right there. That's called the superior ulnar collateral artery. And this one right there is just below that. So it's called the inferior ulnar collateral artery. Okay, so anterior, posterior circumflex humeral, deep brachial, and then superior ulnar collateral, inferior ulnar collateral artery. Okay, cool. Now we come down the brachial artery. Here's what I want you to remember. We're assuming that the wireman is in anatomical position. So his palms are forward, his thumb is pointing out laterally, and his pinky is medial. So this right here is the radial artery, and this right here is the ulnar artery. Okay? So radial side, ulnar side. So what happens is the brachial artery comes down, and it splits into the radial artery and the ulnar artery. Coming off of the ulnar artery, you're going to see this little guy right there, 69. That is called the common interosseous artery. Now the common interosseous artery, you can hear it by the name interosseous, it runs between the actual the bones, the radius and the ulna, in the interosseous membrane there. And there's a branch here that goes anterior, and that's called the anterior interosseous. What I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to turn this a little bit laterally here. And if you look, you'll see another branch, which is going to be the posterior branch. So we had the common interosseous splitting into the anterior interosseous, and then this one here in the back, which is called the posterior interosseous artery. Okay, so let me go ahead and turn this back to the anterior view. So we got common interosseous, anterior, and in the back is the posterior interosseous. Another branch coming off of the ulnar, you can see it right there. It's actually called the ulnar recurrent artery. In the same way, this was actually called the radial artery. Well, there's a branch coming off of the radial, which is this one right there. It's called the radial recurrent artery. Now, then what happens is the radial artery and the ulnar artery feed down into this nice little beautiful arch, which is on the superficial part of the palm. So if you look here, it's denoted by 73. It's this little bit one right there. It's called the superficial palmar arch. Okay? So this bad boy right there is called the superficial palmar arch. Now, the superficial palmar arch has these little things coming off of them. And if you look here, it's represented by 74. That is called the common palmar digital arteries. The common palmar digital arteries actually branch out, and then they come out all the way to the digits, right? So this is now called the proper palmar digital arteries, represented by number 75. In the back, we have a little bit more deeper portion here. So if you can see, here's 73, that's the superficial palmar arch. Just beneath that, right there, is the deep palmar arch. So right there is the deep palmar arch. The deep palmar arch is also important too, okay? Now, there's one more branch, but I'm going to have to turn this laterally again. Okay, so I just turned it around so we can see the dorsum of the hand here. We're still on the left side, okay? But it's this little arch right there in the back. They actually call this the dorsal carpal arch, okay? So you had the superficial palmar arch, deep palmar arch. On the dorsum of the hand, you're going to have the dorsal carpal arch. Then, coming off of the dorsal carpal arch is going to be what's called the dorsal metacarpal arteries. Then coming down from this big fat part right there, the dorsal metacarpal arteries, it's going to come down here as the dorsal digital arteries. All right, let's have a quick recap of the upper limb arteries then. Ready? So again, if you remember back up here, we had the subclavian artery, then we had the axillary, and we had some minor branches coming off, right? We said that this was the thoracoacromial. We said this was the lateral thoracic. We said this one right here was the superior thoracic. We said this was the circumflex scapular. And then we said this was the subscapular artery. We said then we went down into the brachial artery right here. And then there was the anterior humeral circumflex, posterior humeral circumflex, another branch which is called the deep brachial, the superior ulnar collateral, the inferior ulnar collateral. Then we came down, and remember this is the thumb side, this is the pinky side, so this is the radial artery, and this right here is the ulnar artery. Then we said that the ulnar artery had this right here called the common interosseous artery, which split into the anterior, and if you remember, the posterior interosseous artery. We also said it had another branch coming off here, which was called the ulnar recurrent. In the same way, we had the radial artery here, which had the radial recurrent artery. Then as we come down the radial and the ulnar, if you remember, we said we go into what's called the superficial palmar arch, then the common palmar digital arteries, which was 74, and then 75, which was the proper palmar digital arteries. Then we said just underneath the superficial palmar arch is the deep palmar arch. And then we said on the dorsum of the hand, we have the dorsal carpal arch. And then if you can see here, 66 is representing the dorsal metacarpal arteries, and then we continue down as the dorsal digital arteries. All right, Ninja Nerds, so we already covered the upper limb arteries. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cover the lower limb arteries of Wireman. Okay, so we're going to specifically focus on the left side, the left lower limb. So let's go ahead and dig in. All right, so let's get started. So first off, if you remember, this big red vessel here is called the abdominal aorta. The abdominal aorta actually splits, and it goes into a left common iliac artery, which is on this side, and then again over here is going to be the right common iliac. We're going to specifically focus on the left side, but remember, everything on the left side is the same for the right side. Well, again, we got the common iliac artery. The common iliac artery splits into an external iliac artery and another one, which is going to be right here, and that is called the internal iliac artery. So you have external, internal iliac artery. Now, we're not going to focus on all the branches of the internal iliac because it can get a little dicey there, but if you do want to remember, it is the superior gluteal, inferior gluteal, internal pudendal, and the obturator arteries. We have another model where we can see those arteries a lot better. But we're going to focus primarily on the external iliac. So if we come down the external iliac, it goes into what's called the femoral artery. So now we're here at the femoral artery. The femoral artery has a very important branch, which I'm going to kind of grab on here and pull out. It's this one right here. This right here is called the deep femoral artery. Okay, so this is called the deep femoral artery. The deep femoral artery has branches that come off laterally and come off medially. This one right here is called the lateral circumflex femoral artery. This one over here is called the medial circumflex femoral artery. Okay? So we got femoral, deep femoral, lateral circumflex femoral, medial circumflex femoral. Now, as we come down the femoral, there's all these little like minor branches. If you really want to know them, this is the descending genicular. Then this is the superior medial genicular artery. This is the superior lateral genicular artery. This is the inferior lateral genicular artery. And this is going to be the inferior and medial genicular artery. Okay? Then as we come down and we have all those little branches, we get to about right here. Right here we hit another important artery, and this is called the popliteal artery. Okay, so this right here is called the popliteal artery. So again, descending genicular, superior medial, inferior medial genicular arteries, and then this is the superior and inferior lateral genicular arteries, popliteal artery. Now, the popliteal artery is going to give off some branches, right? So this one right here, this big mambo jumbo going down right here is called the anterior tibial artery. So it's this one right there, okay? Then we have another one, which is going to be here in the back, okay? This guy right there is specifically going to be called the posterior tibial artery, okay? And then we have another one over here, and this is going to be 137 and 64 is the fibular or the peroneal artery, okay? So again, just to recap that, coming off of the popliteal, you have the anterior tibial, you have the posterior tibial, and you have the fibular or the peroneal artery. And if you really wanted to know, these are little branches here, posterior tibial recurrent, and then this one right there is the anterior tibial recurrent artery, okay? All right, so now we did that. Now let's continue to go down here into the nice old foot. All right, so as we continue down, we're going to go down here through the anterior tibial artery. As we go down the anterior tibial artery, we're going to come to this artery right here, 132. And 132 is specifically going to be what's called the dorsalis pedis artery. Okay, so you should have 132, which is the dorsalis pedis artery. Then after that, the dorsalis pedis artery is going to go into what's called this little arch here, this artery here that arches. That's called the arcuate artery. So again, anterior tibial, dorsalis pedis, arcuate artery. Then coming off of the arcuate artery, you have these ones right here, which are called your dorsal metatarsal arteries. And then coming off of the dorsal metatarsal arteries is going to be the dorsal digital arteries. So let's recap that again. Anterior tibial feeds into the dorsalis pedis, arcuate artery, dorsal metatarsal, and dorsal digital arteries. All right, so now let's go ahead and have like a nice little quick recap again of what we said. We're coming down the anterior tibial artery, but remember, as we go down the anterior tibial artery, we go into this surface of the foot. This is the dorsum of the foot. Okay, so this is the dorsum of the foot. The bottom of the foot is going to be the plantar part of the foot. So remember that. This is the dorsum of the foot. This is the plantar part of the foot. Okay, that's crucial here. So now we come down anterior tibial artery. It's going to feed into this artery right here, 132. That is called the dorsalis pedis artery. Now, the dorsalis pedis artery is going to come around here, and this, like, it's like an arch here. Let me get this out the way. If I move this out the way, you can see there's like an artery here that arches all the way around here. That is called the arcuate artery, okay? Then coming off of the arcuate artery is going to be what's called the dorsal metatarsal arteries, and then coming off of the dorsal metatarsal arteries will be the dorsal digital. Now, the plantar are going to be really tough, and the reason why is we're going to be looking at this in a little bit of a different way. So just trust me and bear with me on this, okay? So now we got to be really crucial here. If we come down the posterior tibial artery, that's going to feed into the plantar part. The anterior tibial feeds specifically into the dorsal part. So follow this down, the posterior tibial, it's going to feed into two distinguishable arteries. If I pull here with this pipe cleaner right there, this artery, that is called the medial plantar artery. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this in a little bit of a lateral way here, because the other branch is this one right here. and that is called the lateral plantar artery. So the posterior tibial artery splits into the blue one over here, which is the medial plantar, and the white one here, which is the lateral plantar. Let me come back to this view here, and I have another thing that we have to hit. So now, it might be a little tough to see here, but what happens is the medial plantar artery and the lateral plantar artery go into this arch right here, 146. It's underneath. It's deep to this arcuate. And this one right here, it's on the plantar side. It's called the plantar arch. So you have to remember that. Medial plantar artery, lateral plantar artery go into this structure here, this arch, which is beneath or deep to the arcuate artery, and it is called the plantar arch. The plantar arch, again, you can't really see it that well, but it gives off branches underneath here, which is called the plantar metacarpal arteries, and then it gives off branches down here as what's called the plantar digital arteries. All right, Ninja Nerds, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the veins, but we're specifically in this video only going to focus on the veins of the upper limb, and then we'll talk about the veins of the lower limb. So again, we're going to do it on the right side, but realize that everything on the right side is going to be the same as that on the left side. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So if we start up here, kind of around the clavicle area, same area we started with the arteries, is we have here the subclavian vein. Again, this would be the right subclavian vein, but we're not going to say that for every vein from this point on. Just realize that this is the subclavian vein. And if you really do want to remember, this vein here, which is dumping into it, is the external jugular. And then you also have this vein right here, number 10. That's the vertebral vein. And then over here, this one right there is called the internal jugular. Technically, again, it's the right. And the internal jugular vein and the subclavian vein join to make the brachiocephalic, particularly the right brachiocephalic. All right, anyway, let's come back here. We have the subclavian vein. This is going to be the axillary vein right there. So again, this part right here is going to be the axillary vein. All right, so this vein right here is actually going to be feeding into the axillary as well. And again, this right here is called the long thoracic vein. And this one right here is actually called the subscapular vein. All right, so if we start here at the axillary vein, there's a vein that comes all the way from the axillary vein all the way down to the thumb side. Okay, because you have to remember anatomical position, thumbs pointing out this way, pinkies this way. This vein here going all the way down is going to be specifically the cephalic vein, number 30 here. That's the cephalic vein. So again, this vein right here all the way down is the cephalic vein. Then there's another vein that runs down the pinky side from the brachial vein all the way down to the pinky side. And if you can see, I'm coming all the way down right here and then right here. That's the basilic vein, okay? So again, we got cephalic and we got basilic vein. Now, there's another vein here because the axillary vein feeds down here into this part right here, and this right there is called the brachial vein. Okay, so you got the brachial vein here in the middle, cephalic vein, and basilic vein. Now, the next thing is, as we come down here, we come to like this, the antecubital region. There's a vein that extends an anastomosis. It forms an anastomosis, which is just basically an alternative or collateral channel for the blood to flow between the cephalic and the basilic. It's going right here, if you can see it. And this right there is called the median cubital vein. Okay, so going from here, this little V part there, that's the median cubital vein. There's a vein that continues down from that, though. If we follow this down right here, that's called the median antebrachial vein. So again, we got cephalic over here, basilic over here, median cubital vein is connecting them, and then we have the median antebrachial vein. Next thing, we have the brachial vein here, yeah? But the brachial vein, remember, this is the thumb side out towards me and pinky side towards this way. So this vein right here is called the radial vein. This vein right here is called the radial vein. In the same way, this vein right here is called the ulnar vein. Okay? So you have median antebrachial, radial, ulnar vein, and then cephalic, basilic. Now, as we come down even further, remember, you're assuming that this is the palm of the hand and the back is the dorsum of the hand. So there you got this palmar venous arch. Remember, this is the palm of the hand, and it's formed by the ulnar vein and the radial vein. So if you see the ulnar vein and the radial vein, they come together, they form this nice little palmar venous arch. In the same way, follow the cephalic and the basilic all the way down. And they form a little connection right here, this little loop that's connecting the two guys together. That little loop right there is called the dorsal venous arch. And again, it's connecting specifically the cephalic vein to the basilic vein. All right, and so just to kind of just, review and have a nice little recap here. If you see right there, I just wanted to make sure that you guys could see this. Number 36, it's hard to see because of that little sticker there, but it's literally like a little loop. And it's an anastomosis that connects the actual cephalic vein to the basilic vein. Okay, so the cephalic vein and the basilic vein come down and they actually have an anastomosis via this 36 right there, which is called the dorsal venous arch. Last couple things here is coming off the dorsum of the hand, you're going to have this part right here. And this right here is called the dorsal metacarpal vein. And then coming down from this is the dorsal digital veins. All right, so that covers the upper limb veins. Now let's go ahead and do the lower limb veins. All right, guys, so now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the veins of the leg. And again, this is the right side, this is the left side, but I'm not going to call every single vein right this, right that. We're going to assume that it's on the right side, and you should know that, okay? So remember, over here, if you have coming up here, you're going to have this structure right here. And that structure right there is called the inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava actually has this bifurcation point, which is right here, and that's where you have your common iliac veins, right and left. The common iliac veins split though. If you can see here, it splits into this point right here, which is your external iliac vein, and then over here, which is your internal iliac vein. Okay, so external iliac, internal iliac. We're not going to focus on the internal iliac branches though, we're going to specifically focus on the external iliac. Now, what happens from here is the external iliac is going to be fed specifically by the femoral vein. So here you're going to have your femoral vein. So femoral vein here. All right, so again, so we have right here behind the femoral vein, or deep to it, the deep femoral vein. Okay, so here's our deep femoral vein. And again, this is the femoral vein. Now, there's two branches of the deep femoral vein. This one right here, which is the medial circumflex femoral, and this one right here, which is the lateral circumflex femoral vein. Okay, so remember, femoral vein, deep femoral vein, lateral circumflex femoral, medial circumflex femoral, and then again, we said that over here you'll have your external iliac, internal iliac, common iliac. Okay, another really cool vein that they use a lot in CABG, coronary artery bypass grafts, is they can use this vein, and they call this one, it goes all the way up here. It's called the great saphenous vein. Okay, so this is called the great saphenous vein. They use it a lot in the CABG surgeries. Then you have another one, which is called the small saphenous vein. So if I just kind of pull this out here, I have this guy going right all the way down here. This one right here is called the small saphenous vein. Okay, so great saphenous, small saphenous vein. All right, cool. Now we're going to come down here. The femoral vein then feeds, it basically gets fed by this vein right here, which is called the popliteal vein. So you have the popliteal vein right here. Okay, so great saphenous, small saphenous, popliteal vein. The popliteal vein gets fed by three branches. This one here, which is called the anterior tibial vein. This one right here, 76, which is called the fibular or the peroneal vein. And this one over here, which is actually called the posterior tibial vein. All right, so again, popliteal vein is fed by three branches. Anterior tibial vein, fibular or the peroneal vein, and then the posterior tibial vein. All right, so now we are going to work we worked through these guys. Now we're going to come down here to the foot. So if you remember this vein right here, it'll feed into the anterior tibial, and it's right here. This is actually called the dorsalis pedis vein, okay? And it gets fed by this little arching here. You see these little arches? That's called the dorsal venous arch of the foot, right? So you got the dorsal venous arch of the foot, and then you got your dorsalis pedis vein. Coming from the dorsal venous arch is your dorsal metatarsal veins, and then actually from that it's fed by the dorsal digital veins. Okay, so dorsal digital veins, dorsal metatarsal veins, dorsal venous arch, dorsalis pedis. Now, here's where it's going to get a little tough, guys, and it's not perfect for this one, so you're just going to have to trust me when I say it. In the same way for the arteries, you had the lateral and the medial plantar artery. You have a lateral and a medial plantar vein. It's going to be coming specifically from the posterior tibial. The posterior tibial vein will feed into down here. You have a medial plantar vein and you'll have a lateral plantar vein. And they'll come together and make what's called the plantar venous arch. From the plantar venous arch, you'll have the plantar metatarsal veins and the plantar digital veins. Again, it's really hard to visualize on this model. We do have other models that will show you this on, but again, just a quick recap, posterior tibial does come down here and it gets blood from the medial plantar vein, the lateral plantar vein, where they come together is going to be called the plantar venous arch. And then from there, there'll be the plantar metatarsal veins, and then the most distal part is the plantar digital veins. All right, engineers, so in this video, we covered all the arteries and the veins of the upper and the lower limbs on our wireman model here. I hope it made sense. I hope you guys really did enjoy it. If you guys did, please hit that like button, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Also, if you guys get a chance, go check out our Facebook, our Instagram, maybe even our Patreon account. All right, engineers, as always, until next time.